Consume Me is juggling a lot. It's a game that is inherently silly, but it's also about real stuff. It looks goofy and it's full of very fun mini-games about studying for exams, doing your chores, getting a boyfriend, and sticking to an impossible diet. Its creator and lead character, Jenny Zhao, has spent the past 10 years making the game with her co-creator AP Thompson, and the last 3 years irreverently posting about the game on TikTok and Instagram.
Hey, did you feel fat? And freaking ugly? And also stupid? In high school? Well, I did. And I spent the past 10 years making a video game about it. It's called Consume Me, and it won a bunch of awards. You can play the free demo now out on Steam.
Consume Me is an autobiographical story of a young girl and the untenable pressures that she feels to be a success, whatever that means. It's serious, but it is goofy. The game has sad moments, but it's not somber. Far more often, it's really funny, chronicling Jenny's young adulthood through a series of WarioWare-style minigames. They are chaotic and funny and messed up in all the ways that real life can often be. Before it ever shows you its first of those minigames, Consume Me opens with a content warning. So we will too. This game is clearly about mental health, but it's also largely about dieting and eating disorders, because one way that Jenny deals with her overwhelming to-do list is by utilizing a restrictive diet as proof that she can reach her goals. We'll be addressing the in-game representation of eating disorders, and my writing partner Lex and I,
Hey everyone!
We'll be sharing some of our own stories. So if any of that isn't something you should listen to, there's zero shame in moving on to another video. But if you take anything from this video, it should be that Jenny and AP are doing something really hard with Consume Me. They're balancing a silly aesthetic with a narrative that is occasionally dark and always at least stressful. And they're managing that by giving fictional Jenny a relatable problem: the desire for control. When the game begins, Jenny learns that her crush, Oliver, is going to be at a pool party that she's been invited to next weekend. What's more is that she still needs to buy a bathing suit. Looking herself in the mirror, she has a conversation with herself, and Mirror Jenny puts Jenny on a strict diet of 500 bites a day. The game is careful not to set up bites as a direct replacement for calories, as it doesn't want to encourage calorie counting. But it does absolutely succeed at making sticking to a diet of 500 bites as anxiety-inducing as real-life calorie counting. When Jenny sits down to eat, her plate has a bunch of small squares where food pieces can be placed and gaps where they can't. The player is given 3 choices of food items in Tetris-like shapes, and they can keep placing food on the plate until there's no more room for any of the options available. Each piece of food has a bite count associated, which has basically nothing to do with its shape or how large it is on the plate. And any unfilled squares on Jenny's plate reduce her guts stat for the day, meaning you can blow right past that 500 bite diet, or 450 bite diet as the game proceeds, and Jenny can still be starving. As a person who's been on many diets in my life, that's the realest shit I've ever seen in a video game. There are ways to make this minigame easier. You can acquire pieces of cheese or bacon that you can pull from your inventory during any given meal to fill gaps. And at certain times, you can feed pieces of food that you don't want to Jenny's dog. But even these tools contribute to Jenny's and the player's desire for control. Getting pieces of food into your inventory often means spending money or lucking into a random event. Narratively, Jenny's dog isn't always there, and you only get so many chances to get rid of a piece of food by feeding the dog. These mechanics, meant to be reprieves from randomness, become part of the simulation and strategy, and contribute to the anxiety the game produces. Consume Me takes place over 6 chapters of Jenny's life. Each chapter is a week or 2 of her life, broken up a day at a time. And each day, Jenny has only enough time for a set amount of activities. Each chapter comes with a to-do list, and Jenny must complete that to-do list before the deadline. If we're talking genre, Consume Me is a life management sim, where each activity is its own minigame. And I think it's notable that both the management sim, the strategy aspect, and the goofy minigames are really fun. I found myself strategizing my days to optimally go after each task on my to-do list and maximizing each minigame to get the best results, so that I could maybe squeak out one extra slot for another activity. I took actual pride in getting better at the workout and reading minigames. But I also found myself stressed by Jenny's to-do list. I had to redo Chapter 2 4 different times, improving my completion of the list with each attempt. It felt impossible to stay under Jenny's bite count, go on 2 dates with Oliver, finish Jenny's summer reading, and complete 2 other side goals so that Oliver's mom thought she was interesting enough to be able to get into college. I had to make concessions like reading the Spark Notes rather than the actual book. And this was Chapter 2. The to-do lists only get harder from there. I started to reach a breaking point in Chapter 5 when every time Jenny would study for her exams, she'd get a migraine and receive a mental block. In order to remove that mental block, I often had to put other goals at risk by, for example, eating a snack that might help her gain energy, but might also go against her diet.
The thing about eating disorders is sometimes, especially near the beginning, it can feel really good. There's a high that comes from jumping through the obstacle course you've set for yourself, not unlike the rush of score chasing. You feel stronger than your body's physical needs. It feels like you can bypass the necessities others are bound to, and you seem to have figured out how to game the system that everyone else has to languish their way through. At least for a little while.
We see Jenny find early success in the goals she sets for herself, including her diet. Despite being afraid, she manages to find a swimsuit at the mall that she feels confident in. She ends up dating Oliver and spending all of her summer with him. She manages to balance her relationship, her summer reading, her diet, and her hobbies pretty well. And Oliver's a sweet guy. He's super kind to Jenny. He loves K-pop the same way she does. They are a genuinely good young couple. There's a conversation in Chapter 3 where Jenny is telling Oliver about how stressful it is to balance spending time with him and trying to get into college, and she starts to talk about her to-do list the way that we see it, as a video game, with stats to be managed. And Oliver reminds her that this is her real life, and their relationship is not a video game.
What's brilliant about Konsumi's array of minigames is how they mirror this initial rush and the ensuing desire to try and do better, push further, just to prove you can. It's not enough to just prepare Jenny's lunches within the bite limit. Soon you want to see how low you can get those bites while making sure Jenny isn't too hungry. Likewise, it's not enough to go without lunch every day or drop a dress size or stick to a calorie count. You want to skip 2 meals in a row, then eat every other day, and so on until you're hiding in your room from any social life that might interfere with your determination to starve yourself. Eating disorders are insidious like that. You can never win, but they trick you into thinking you can until they've sucked you in too deep to see a way out. They're like a slot machine that's trying to kill you.
We see things start to break down for Jenny pretty early, but as the game progresses, it becomes clearer and clearer that what she's doing is not sustainable. At first, it's skipping a date with Oliver because she'll go over her bite count for the day if she gets pizza with him. Then it's inventing a competition that she can win against a friend of hers. In some chapters, it looks like making room for a bunch of extra activities just so that she can get a good recommendation for college. By the time she's in college and trying to do well in school so that she can transfer to be near Oliver, the stress starts manifesting physically as those headaches represented by the mental blocks I mentioned earlier. There are signs that Jenny is reaching a breaking point as early as Chapter 1. Often, in order to reach all of her goals, I was neglecting one of the 3 main stats: mood, energy, or guts. It felt nearly impossible to keep those meters full all at the same time, and it felt like I could only go on because all of the meters reset to full when you successfully complete a chapter. But as the to-do lists became longer and more difficult, and the obstacles to completing them became larger and harder to move around, I started to doubt Jenny's and my ability to make it to the next chapter. If you want to avoid narrative spoilers, now's the time to skip to the next chapter of the video. In Chapter 5, Jenny has made it to college, but she's not doing great. She and Oliver are still together, but he's at another school. She's saving up to go see him, but she also needs to pass her exams so that she can transfer to his school. This is when those mental blocks start to show up, and we get this really bizarre sequence where Jenny starts going to church and gains the ability to pray away mental blocks once a day. But even faith can't keep things from falling apart. Jenny and Oliver have a phone call scheduled, but Oliver isn't responding to text messages. After several hours of waiting, Jenny finally reaches him and tears into him for making her wait. Again, she tells him all about how stressed she's been, but in those silly video game terms she used earlier, the way that we see it. She needs to pass her exams, but also do her homework and doesn't have enough free time for it. She says, without the dog here, my diet is basically impossible, which sounds absurd outside of a video game context. She tells Oliver that calling him can restore her mood, energy, and guts. Oliver is obviously confused, and this time, instead of talking her down, he breaks up with her. I can't say that this is narratively unique or unexpected, but how the game mechanically handles this moment is the part that I can't stop thinking about. Instead of going to bed, Jenny sits in the shower and cries. I must stress that this game never stops being silly, even in sad moments like this. Getting in the shower involves a minigame where Jenny tests the water temperature with her foot, and you do that by moving the analog stick around. Sitting in the shower, Jenny realizes that her entire to-do list is made up of things that don't matter to her anymore. She doesn't need to ace her tests because she doesn't need to transfer schools, because she doesn't need to go to Oliver's school anymore because they're not together. Her entire to-do list was made up of pressures that didn't belong to her. Shortly after this, Jenny goes home for break and doesn't go back to school. It takes a long time for her to find the freedom in not having a to-do list full of goals that don't serve her. This is something that I'm extremely familiar with. I've talked in videos before about the freedom you can find when you accept that success for a queer person often looks a lot like someone else's idea of failure. But another way that I've felt this is in my career. I can't actually go too deep into it because I do still have a day job, but I know what it's like to feel burnt out and like I'm chasing something I don't actually want anymore. I know what it's like to feel trapped in that chase, constantly sprinting forward, unable to stop, and feeling like I might faint any moment. I yearn for the freedom of a to-do list that falls away and leaves me with enlightenment. I spent years trying to find that freedom, and I've spent years pushing through the pain. Checking off items, running on fumes, and barely getting by on the memory of a time when I used to be in control. Have you ever been so overwhelmed by expectations that you thought you might completely fall apart? Have you ever had a moment where there was so much on your plate that you considered giving up on all of it? And what did you reach for in that moment? How did you make it through? How much of yourself did you lose to that attempt to wrestle control back from everything?
It's a misconception to think that eating disorders and disordered eating are just about weight loss. Pressures around body image certainly play a role in eating disorders, but they exist in a much larger framework. Oftentimes, they're an attempt to mediate our relationship with the world around us via our relationships with our bodies. And more often than not, the thing we're desperately seeking in that relationship is control. It's no surprise that eating disorders are most prevalent among teenage girls. At least 12% of teenage girls have some form of eating disorder, and given that it's believed only 20% of teenagers with eating disorders seek treatment, the real numbers are probably much higher. Teenage girlhood is the collision of everything overwhelming about puberty with everything terrifying about womanhood. The pressures from every direction, the omnipresent objectification of your body, the casual denial of agency at every turn, and the subliminal message, everywhere you look, that none of this would be an issue if you could just be good enough. Whatever good enough means. Growing up, I was a pretty serious competitive swimmer. And when I was about 14, we got a new coach, who had a saying whenever we complained about practice being too tough. You're not working too hard until I can see the chunks in your teeth. I worked pretty hard in practice, but not quite that hard. And yeah, sometimes I slacked off or skipped, like any kid's bound to do. And then I'd feel guilty about it, even though I knew I'd do it again. But something about my coach's saying got in my head. And I decided that if I was puking, it meant I was working hard enough, no matter how I got there. So I started taking bathroom breaks from practice to make myself throw up. Soon enough, it stopped just being about swimming. I threw up when I felt bad about my performance in school, or about my relationships, or any of the thousandfold insecurities every 14-year-old has. I threw up when I started dealing with depression, to get all the badness out of me. I threw up when I forgot to do my math homework, to prove I was working hard enough, physically suffering enough to be good or worthy. It was like a form of ritual self-flagellation, to exercise whatever things about myself I thought I should be able to control but just couldn't. All of my report cards said I had so much potential if only I could harness it, but I couldn't focus in class the way I did as a kid, and I couldn't keep track of my assignments and projects, and I couldn't drag myself to swim practice when I was on my period, and I couldn't quite fit in with all the girls in my school, but I could puke on command, and then walk out of that bathroom feeling like I had more self-discipline than anyone gave me credit for. I spent most of the next decade battling an eating disorder, on and off. I won't document the whole thing here. Suffice to say that it took a number of different forms and brought me to some pretty dark places. I haven't relapsed in at least 5 years, so please don't worry about me. I'm doing okay. But I think a lot about how misunderstood eating disorders are, and I care a lot about how they're depicted in media. So often, eating disorders are really a coping mechanism for the unmanageable world around us, just like any other form of self-harm. Now, for me, my eating disorder started with my coach, but really what it became was my way to seek control no matter what the issue was. There's so many reasons we might seek control, desperately reaching for anything to grasp onto so we don't drown. Often, those reasons are all happening at the same time.
Consume Me is a very fun look at a really difficult reality. I really admire Jenny and AP for making this game so silly. It's the kind of thing that I'm not good at as a writer or creator, so I'm really in awe of the craft here. Giving the game this tone makes it so much easier to talk about the specific mental health struggles that can lead to eating disorders. And frankly, for me, it's helping me work on some of my own issues regarding burnout. It's a game that I've already brought up to my therapist. Consume Me releases September 25th, 2025, and I think you should play it. And thanks, Lex, for being in this video.
Thanks for having me in it.
And thank you for watching. If you're here at the end and you haven't subscribed, please do so. And if you want to support the work that we're doing on this channel, you can do that at ko-fi.com/Matt Horton. Thank you so much, and we'll catch you next time.